China is in turmoil. The Han lies in ruins, and warlords vie for control of all the land. However, in the jungles, there live an entire force of people who do not give a shit. They just do not care. Total War Warhammer Beijing Edition is the most recent entry into Creative Assembly's franchise of great man history, propaganda, and large-scale massacre simulators released in 2019. As long as you don't think about the Saga games, but no one does. What the game is a rightful celebration of a Chinese person's duty to throw themselves into an oppressive system of serfdom, either working themselves to death or dying in battle in service to distant masters and to glorify the state. What it is not is a cynical attempt to cash in on the Chinese gaming market by making an elaborately detailed soapy titwank out of one of the most cherished periods of Chinese history. The game sees you taking control of one of several distinct flavors of Chinese warlords, popping around in the years surrounding the titular Three Kingdoms period, but as of time of writing, never actually entering it. These flavors themselves come in special groups. One such group, the Han Chinese warlords, range from everybody hates me because I'm an asshole, not because I'm clever, but my faction wins, so huff my nuts, to first in a long line of idiots who get themselves killed and ultimately don't matter that much. And finally, I'm only notable because my best friend is a literal god of war and I'm inexplicably painted as the protagonist of the time period, despite me losing consistently. Then you have the proto-communist party made up of filthy, unwashed peasants who are so angry they've talked themselves into believing that heaven is on their side and that their leaders can do magic, but that their magic stops just short of keeping a sword from killing them. Oh, and criminals. One group is specifically criminals. These warlords, criminals, and anachronistic Mao enthusiasts fight for control of ancient China, as the ruling empire of the time, the Han dynasty, suffers from civil unrest, an infestation of plotting eunuchs, and a weak emperor, before finally collapsing under the weight of a massive dong. Most of these factions think they're the good guys, despite all of them raping and burning the countryside to pick at the corpse of the Han dynasty, in the hopes that the next dynasty will have their name on it. All of them, that is, with the exception of the Big Dong and his son Darth Vader. Those two are blissfully aware that they are massive, indefensible cunts. This awareness makes everyone else very angry at them. You know what, this sounds an awful lot like Han Chinese problems. Let them fight over their fancy castle towns and their open plains and rice fields. We're not going there today. No, today, we're going to the fucking jungle, boys. The Furious Wild expansion expands on the base game of Three Kingdoms by populating the steaming southeastern jungles of China with the Nanman tribes, who I'll get to in a moment. The Nanman, being crazed savages, have their own tech trees and political structure, and their goal is to unify with each other rather than trying to take over all of China. They leave that to the Han Chinese. Their most notable features are the fact that the goddamn mad lads seem to want to light any and all weapons they can get their hands on fire, and are also more than happy to tame some rather ferocious animals and let them loose on their enemies. The elephants are used as mounts and some absolutely terrifying cavalry. The tigers are another story, largely because once you release them you have zero control over them. You just have to let go of their leashes and pray to the goddess of fire that they remember who the enemy is and don't start mauling your own troops. You can never get them back for that battle. Apparently their trainers taught them well enough to kill people on command, but not well enough to come back afterwards. I guess that's what the tiger units do in between battles, just run off and try to catch their favorite tigers again. According to historiography, the Nanman, or Southern Man, was a term used to refer to a large number of disparate indigenous peoples that lived in the southern regions of China. They existed within that region for many centuries before eventually interbreeding to the point of functional non-existence with the mainline Chinese population and simply becoming another part of the genetic soup that makes up the current population of China. An eclectic group of essentially unrelated ethnic groups that happened to live in roughly the same area. At least, that's what historians say. Creative Assembly has a different opinion. According to Creative Assembly, the Nanman were a bunch of tribal psychopaths who painted themselves vibrant colours, communed with dangerous animals, worshipped fire, strapped bamboo and twigs to themselves and called it fucking armour, somehow looked like this in their early 20s, rode elephants bareback and literally beat each other and the Han Chinese to death with rocks tied to sticks on the regs. It's fairly safe to say that CA is paying more attention to the version of the Nanman present in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the ruin-dwelling, elephant-riding, mystic wild man, than the historical truth of them being just some guys who happen to live near and in some jungles. But one of those options is a lot more fun than the other, and good luck trying to sell a DLC on just more dudes. They tried that with the 8 Princes DLC, and everyone fucking hated it! The Nanman tribes are split into 4 playable factions, each led by their distinct tribal warlords, with their own spin and faction mechanics. You have the forces of King Mulu, an elephant-riding, snake-fussing shaman who, based on his dialogue, appears to be a druid from World of Warcraft, I think. His specialties include murdering the Imperial dogs via the use of wild animals, performing rituals in the jungle to bolster the power of his men, and a master's degree in economics. Then you have King Shamoke, whose entire gimmick seems to be being the Chinese Neville Chamberlain, trying to appease the crumbling Han Empire into maybe taking their boot off of the Nanman people's throat. As you'd expect, the rest of the Nanman don't like this boot-licking son of a bitch. Third is Lady Zhu Rong, the supposed daughter of a goddess of fire, leading a cult of shaven-headed insane fire worshippers. Her unique mechanic involves fire-based rituals, which, while it's not explicitly stated, I'm assuming involves throwing non-believers into great sacrificial bonfires in order to hype herself the fuck up. However, she crashes like nothing else afterwards. The fourth and final, and by far the most important, and, if I recall correctly, only faction leader with any basis in reality, is the King of the Man himself, a big old Redbeard, the thickest boy in the jungle, and the second thickest boy in all of China, Meng He. While the other factions have their own mechanics for doing things other than war, Meng He's faction exclusively gains the mechanical benefits by bashing other Nanman's heads together and forcing them to sit the fuck down and pay attention. He is objectively the best choice of the Nanman leaders, and of all the characters in the game, it's a toss-up between him and the Big Dong, as to who is the greatest leader in all of China. Don't at me on this. If you disagree, you're just wrong. On the campaign map, the Nanman played more or less like a somewhat simplified version of the other factions, with very limited diplomatic options from the start, especially when dealing with factions outside of the Nanman tribes. Their focus, regardless of which faction you start as, is very much on rampant and violent expansion and tribal warfare, because the best way to unify a disparate and fractious people is to rock up to them with clubs and pointy sticks and beat the ever-loving shit out of them. When a tribe is pushed to the brink of extinction by another tribe by their last settlement falling into enemy hands, the conquering tribe is given a few unique options for how to deal with the issue. You can confederate with them, claiming all of their territory, which at this point is a single settlement that you've already conquered, stealing all of their items and hiring all of their characters into your faction. You can vassalize them, which is a waste of fucking time, or you can take the normal paths of occupation, or rape and pillage, then occupation, both of which will result in the standard destruction of the faction. Regardless of which you pick, the defeat of one of the tribes will result in your faction claiming their fealty, and any other tribal fealties they might have earned before you wiped them out. Fealties are essentially permanent buffs to your faction, which represent the individual influences of the various Nanman tribes under your control. Alongside the buffs, many of the fealties also unlock the unique units of each Nanman tribe for your faction to use. Amusingly, entering into military alliances will also give you access to the fealties of your allied nations. It's also worth noting that literally every single fealty comes with a penalty to diplomacy with the Han Chinese factions, which, by the time you've unified all of the tribes, will essentially lead to the entire rest of China hating your guts and wanting to burn your damn jungles to the ground. This is a bit peculiar because, at least in my experience, the research options that allow more complicated diplomacy with the Han Chinese factions will only end up being unlocked a good while after the entirety of the civilized world has sworn a blood oath to wipe you out. Unless you focus exclusively on diplomacy, maybe, but I'm not going to do that. This is total war, god damn it. If I wanted to focus on diplomacy, I'd be playing Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or theoretically playing as Kong Rong. On the battlefield, the Narnman are a pretty peculiar bunch. They are, as you would expect from, well, looking at them and the fact they're wearing twigs as hats and armor, somewhat less technologically inclined than their Han counterparts. As such, they lack the crossbowmen, siege weaponry, literal mobile flamethrowers, and even basic cavalry of the Han factions. However, they make up for this with three key things: stealth, fire, and pets. Being, as they are, jungle-dwelling tree people, the Narnman are masters of guerrilla warfare, and it seems are legally required to ambush their foes as much as physically possible. Not even when playing as the Skaven in Total War Warhammer 2 have I ambushed people this often. They make the Han terrified to go into the woods because they never know when the trees are going to start speaking Narnman. This focus on ambushing is of great help to the tribes because, to be blunt, the Narnman aren't the tankiest faction in the world. They really lack any kind of heavily armoured forces, having only one heavy infantry unit, a spearman unit which is specifically tied to King Watugu, whose name I've definitely mispronounced, who is one of the unique but not playable faction leaders. What they do have are a lot of units that can deal a lot of damage pretty quickly. They're a glass cannon faction that hasn't figured out how to make either glass or cannons. Oddly, despite their focus on mobility and swift damage, they lack any form of traditional cavalry, presumably due to the jungle not being ideal for horses. This goes so far as for it to be a complete ball ache to even get decent horse mounts for your generals. By the end of my Mung Her campaign, I'd managed to get about 10,000 elephant mounts and only 2 horses that were worth a shit. In lieu of cavalry, the Narnman rely on 2 things: tigers and elephants. The elephants are, in effect, super heavy and relatively slow cavalry, who do absurd amounts of damage to enemy units, are quite hard to kill, and can easily make entire formations rout on their own. They are extremely fun, and as such, the game only lets you use a few at a time. They are more in line functionally with the monstrous units from Total War Warhammer than anything else in Total War Three Kingdoms, acting as line breakers to bowl the enemy out of the way so that your infantry can get elbow deep into the enemy battle lines, rather than the swift cycle-charging buggery cavalry normally gets up to. I mean, they're elephants, they're faster than people, but they're not that fast. The other option, which is to say the much worse option, is tigers. The tigers are far more fun than they are effective. There are 2 tiger units, tiger warriors and tiger slingers. Much to my eternal sadness, these are not anthropomorphized warrior tigers and men who throw tigers at the enemy respectively. Rather, these 2 options are just picking between if you give your tiger tamers throwy stones or wacky stones. I have yet to work out exactly what the purpose of the tiger units is, other than being entertaining to watch. Functionally, the tiger units are weaker versions of ranged or melee fighters attached to a group of rampaging arsehole cats, who will rush at the nearest enemy unit either when you tell them to, or when they feel like it, and will continue to pursue that one enemy unit until either the enemy dies or they do. If the enemy dies, they'll pick the next closest unit and do it again, until they're dead or the enemy is gone. Amusingly, at least in the early build I have, the AI has no fucking idea how to deal with tigers and just kind of panics and dies in response. The Narnman can get normal cavalry in their tech tree. Unfortunately, this is just Han cavalry they acquire by becoming race traitors and embracing Han modernity. I'm going to wrap this up soon, but there are 2 things I wanted to mention that I'm not sure how to fit into the rest of the video. The first is that the Narnman can gain limited access to a variety of Han troops by capturing and recruiting a Han general, whose initial retinue will include some normal-ass Chinese soldiers, who look deeply uncomfortable standing next to the unwashed savages they now have to call boss. The second is a visual bug, which I have to assume will be gone by the time the DLC actually releases, but is present in the review build I have. For some reason, the Narnman character-specific weapons, the several variations of rock tied to stick and a machete, are all fucking invisible, which lead to a lot of duels between characters in which one of them appears to be using the fucking Force or some D&D monk bullshit to block swords and spears in thin air. This is totally irrelevant, it's just a fucking weird visual. It's funny to me. Okay, so I checked after the DLC actually came out, and they still don't have weapons. So there's still a lot of people wearing half of a tree, basically force punching at the air in order to fight. So that's great. It's a professional quality product. Professional quality product. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed reading this essay as much as I enjoyed writing it. The Nanman make a fantastic addition to the fictional land of China in Creative Assembly's latest fantasy strategy title. I'd, for whatever reason, not played much of Three Kingdoms at all before getting this DLC, despite having had the game since launch. Since then, I've played quite a bit, though not as much as I've played of other CA titles. Looking at you, Total Warhammer 2. Worst thing is that I know there are, like, a lot of people who played a lot more of Total War Warhammer 2 than I have, and that's fucking terrifying! Anyway, this video is done now. If you liked it, let me know via the comments, and I might make more. Or, then again, I might not. I am still, at the end of the day, a barely evolved piece of human garbage in the end. I am, after all, you know, from the north. I'd also like to thank Creative Assembly for providing me a code for this DLC. Granted, they gave it to me for streaming and Let's Playing, but they didn't say I couldn't make a review, so yeah, thanks all the same. I would like to voice my appreciation for the members of Parliament, who continue to offer me their support, despite their parliament being a sham government with no actual power. You're all fantastic, and yet I still hate every single one of you. Bye.